This short little presentation is about Goal 7, and it gets you started with muscle physiology. The objectives here are to distinguish between smooth cardiac and skeletal muscle tissue, which hopefully you have remembered from the previous Goal 4. Describe the structure of a muscle organ, the structure of a muscle fiber, some of the different proteins that are found in muscle, and what a sarcomere is. So smooth cardiac and skeletal muscle are the three types of muscle tissue in the human body, and their job is contraction. All three of them do contraction. Smooth muscle is found in the walls of organs and blood vessels, is involuntary, and has one nucleus per cell, and is not striated. Cardiac muscle, which is also involuntary, contains one nucleus per cell, and it does have striations. It's found only in the heart, but tends to be more branched than the skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle is multinucleated, striated, and voluntary. This section will focus mostly on skeletal muscle action and physiology. So starting with a giant muscle or the entire muscle, the words here can get quite confusing, so pay attention or make yourself some flashcards to help you remember some of these words. Muscles are covered with what's called fascia. There's lots of connective tissue in muscles separating each section. So think of a piece of meat. Muscles are separate hunks wrapped with this fascia, which is continuous with the periosteum of the bone. So this is what attaches it to the bone, the tendon and then the bone. Okay, you're never going to look at meat the same way again. So wrapped around each muscle is the fascia, which is dense connective tissue, and there's no real line between fascia, tendon, periosteum, and the bone. It's kind of a continuous piece of material. In a few cases, muscles are attached to other muscles via a tendon called an aponeurosis. You find this between your six-pack of abs on your belly. It kind of shows this in this upper picture here. Those white areas between those between the rectus abdominis muscle is called aponeurosis, and also on the top of your head, connecting the frontalis muscle and the occipitalis muscle. For each single muscle, underneath the fascia is a layer of membrane connective tissue called the epimysium, and then muscles themselves are in bundles, and you can see each bundle. They've pulled one bundle out, so you see the bundles up here, and each bundle is called a fascicle or a fasciculi, and it's wrapped around by a membrane called the perimysium. Okay, so the whole thing is wrapped by the epimysium, and then the bundles or fascicles are wrapped by the perimysium, and then each bundle is made up of a single muscle fiber, and each muscle fiber is bound or surrounded by the endomysium. So endomysium around a fiber, perimysium around a fasciculi, and epimysium around the whole muscle underneath the fascia, which attaches to the tendon, to the periosteum, to the bone. Got that? Here's another picture. Okay, so the whole muscle with epimysium, a bundle called a fasciculi wrapped around by the perimysium, and a muscle fiber wrapped around by the endomysium. Okay. Here's one that's even more clear, perhaps. Okay, just another view of the macrophage or macrostructure of a muscle. Okay, now we're going to talk about a single muscle fiber. Again, each muscle fiber here is wrapped around by the endomysium, but it also, of course, has a cell membrane. Okay, inside a muscle fiber there are myofibrils, and these are what are going to do the contraction. Okay, so we're going to talk more about muscle fibers and these little myofibrils, but that's does the work of the muscle. This is actin and myosin, and you can see the actin and myosin a little bit in the fiber itself, but it all lines up. They line up very organized fashion, and that's what gives us those striations that we saw in that first slide. Each unit of these lined up is referred to as a sarcomere, and a sarcomere is the smallest contractile unit in a muscle. It extends from Z-line to Z-line, and we'll talk more about that in a second here. The Some of the names of the stuff in a muscle fiber have special names. Obviously mitochondria are the power packs of the cell, those are the same. But instead of endoplasmic reticulum, it's called sarcoplasmic reticulum in a muscle cell. And instead of cytoplasm, it's sarcoplasm. The membrane, the cell membrane, is called the sarcolemma instead of the lipid bilayer. So just some different words here to make A&P students, cry or something, I don't know. And calcium, which is going to be involved in contraction, which we'll talk about in the next module, is stored in these enlarged areas of the sarcoplasmic reticulum called cisternae. We'll see that word here in another few minutes. So you should pause this my module or my lecture here for a second and check out this YouTube. It talks about the muscle structure, and hopefully you'll find that helpful. So, can you name the parts? Okay, this one up here, hopefully you said tendon. Okay, and the next one, epimysium, around the entire muscle. Can you name what this is right here? Fasciculi. And hopefully you know that's surrounded by the perimysium. Okay, this one is the bone. Okay, and hopefully you're going to say perimysium for that one, around the bundle. And then a single muscle fiber, and in the muscle fiber is the myofibril, or surrounded by endomysium. Okay, so up close and personal, the muscle fiber, again, is a single muscle cell. So when I say muscle fiber, think of muscle cell. They just call it something different in this one. The endoplasmic reticulum is called the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and these enlarged portions right here are called the cisternae, and that's where the calcium is stored. Now there's little invaginations or little indentations into a muscle fiber called transverse tubules, and often I abbreviate that T-tubules when talking or writing it out. And so the fluid on the outside of the cell can go down inside of this, but then that increases the surface area of this cell, so whatever is inside the T-tubules can get inside the cells easily. And that is going to be helpful when sodium needs to rush in to cause depolarization to induce a contraction, which again we're going to talk about later. So the sarcoplasmic reticulum has cisternae to store the calcium, and the transverse tubules are little indentations into a muscle fiber to increase the surface area so ions can flow in and out of that muscle fiber easier. Alright, some of the proteins that make up muscle, the big two that are involved in contraction are actin and myosin. Myosin is known as the thick filament. It's the most abundant protein in a skeletal muscle, and it has little tiny barbs that allow it to interact with the thin myofibrils, which are known as actin. Actin for thin and myosin are the thick ones. Kind of shows a picture here. The red here is the thick filament. You see the little barbs attaching to the blue, which are the thin filaments or the actin. Those barbs reach up and pull the blue closer together, and from Z line to Z line, okay, the end of where the actin is attached is right here, and right here is called a sarcomere. Okay, there are some other proteins involved in muscle cells. One of them, or two of them, that kind of work together are troponin and tropomyosin. Troponin and tropomyosin, and they're showing those here in the red and the purple, are kind of wrapped around the actin. And when calcium's around, it pulls the troponin and tropomyosin away from the actin, so then the actin can bind to myosin. So actin is either wrapped by the TNT, troponin and tropomyosin, or it can interact with myosin, but it can't do both at the same time. Another protein that's around is dystrophin, and dystrophin is a protein that helps muscle fibers kind of hold together during contraction. And maybe you've heard of muscular dystrophy. People who have muscular dystrophy, the fiber will burst during contraction because they don't have this stabilizing dystrophin protein that works well. So Duchenne muscular dystrophy is caused by low or inadequate or not working dystrophin. There are other proteins that I think the names are cool, Herculin and Titin. Some of the largest proteins found in the human body are these proteins, and they're also involved in muscle fibers, or in muscle fibers. So again, a sarcomere goes from Z line to Z line. It is the smallest contractile unit in a muscle fiber. So there'll be thousands of sarcomeres all lined up in a muscle fiber. So a muscle fiber can be a couple feet long. So long tube-like cells. The Z line is where the actin, which is in red in this picture, the thin, and the myosin are the thick ones. So where the actin is attached from one Z line to another, the myosin is going to reach up and grab that actin and pull the Z lines closer together. And that's what causes contraction. So up in this picture here, the myosin is the gray and the Z lines are the dark black. And when you look under a microscope in a histology slide, you can see all these black lines lined up, and that's what we call striations. Anyway, check out your textbook. The atlas has some histology of smooth cardiac and skeletal muscle comparison. Your online lessons, don't forget the websites, and you can always ask me.